Jake Bennett didn't expect anything unusual that Thursday morning. His routine was simple: coffee in a travel mug, truck warmed up by 6:45, and a 30-minute drive to the lumber mill where he worked just outside of Bozeman, Montana. The roads were dusted in fresh snow, and the sky was painted with the soft gray-blue haze of an early winter morning. Cold, yes, but nothing he hadn't driven through 100 times before. As his truck rumbled along the two-lane back road that cut through a stretch of thick pine woods, something made him ease off the gas. Up ahead, near the edge of the tree line, there was a dark shape slumped in the snow. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't the usual debris either. Not a log, not trash, something about it looked wrong. It was instinct more than logic that made him pull over. Jake stopped the truck, threw it in park, and stepped out into the biting cold. The wind hit him like a slap, and his boots crunched loudly against the snow as he stepped off the road and toward the shape. It was maybe 20 feet from the roadside, partially hidden under a snow-covered bush. The closer he got, the faster his heart began to beat. It was a dog, a German shepherd. She lay motionless, her fur dusted in frost, her body curled tightly in a protective ball. He knelt down, not sure what to expect, when he noticed something that sent a chill through him deeper than the wind ever could. There were puppies, 2 of them, tiny, barely old enough to walk, huddled close to the mother's side. And they were alive, just barely. One lifted its head with effort, the other twitched its ear. The mother, though, was gone. Her body stiff, her eyes closed. She had frozen in place, using herself as a living shield. Jake stared at the scene, frozen in his own way. A mix of shock, sadness, and awe settled over him. He had never seen anything like it. She had given everything to protect her young. And now it was up to him. Without thinking, Jake took off his jacket, wrapped the shivering pups gently, and held them close to his chest. "Hang on," he muttered, voice trembling. "You're not going out like this." He turned back toward the truck, his breath fogging in the air. This morning was no longer ordinary. It had just become unforgettable. Jake's hands trembled as he carefully cradled the tiny, shivering puppies against his chest. Their soft, delicate bodies felt like fragile little birds, no more than a few weeks old. He could hear their weak breaths as they tried to adjust to the sudden warmth of his body. But their tiny bodies were too cold, too lifeless. The mother dog lay motionless behind them, and as Jake looked at her, he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Why had no one noticed her sooner? He glanced down at the 2 puppies again. The one in his right arm let out a tiny whimper, its eyes still squeezed shut from the cold. The other was a bit stronger, its head lifting slightly to peer out from beneath Jake's jacket. He didn't know how long they had been like this. How long the mother had fought to keep them alive through the night. Every instinct told him he had to act fast. There was no time to waste. Jake turned toward his truck, the weight of the puppies in his arms feeling like a responsibility he had never expected. He looked back one last time at the German shepherd, lying still in the snow. A sob threatened to rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down. The reality of what had happened hit him harder than the chill in the air. She was gone. But these puppies, these fragile little lives, still had a chance. Jake didn't think twice. He had to get them out of the cold. His boots crunched louder than he intended as he hurried back to the truck, hoping that the warmth of the engine would be enough to keep the puppies alive for the short drive home. As he reached the truck, he opened the passenger side door and gently placed them on the seat. He could see their tiny bodies trembling under the faint glow of the dashboard lights. The one who had been weaker seemed to be struggling more now, barely moving, while the other was a bit more alert. "Hang in there," Jake whispered, his voice strained as he slid into the driver's seat. He threw the truck in gear and started down the road, his eyes darting back and forth between the rearview mirror and the puppies in the passenger seat. He had no idea how long they would last like this. He just knew he had to get them home, where they'd have a chance. The radio buzzed softly in the background, but the noise seemed distant, almost irrelevant. In that moment, all Jake could think about was how, on a regular morning drive, his life had shifted into something entirely unexpected, and how his next move would determine whether these little lives survived. Jake's heart raced as he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The cold was unbearable, even inside the truck, and the faint sound of the puppy's shallow breaths was the only thing that kept him focused. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was just after 7:00 a.m. His shift at the lumber mill started in less than an hour, but there was no way he was going to make it today. Not with 2 dying puppies in his truck. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. He had no experience with animals, no training, but he knew one thing. They were running out of time. The weak puppy, barely more than a whimpering ball of fur, was losing color, and its breathing was becoming more shallow with every passing minute. Jake didn't hesitate. He turned the wheel sharply and veered off the main road, heading straight for his house. His home wasn't far, but in his mind, every second felt like a lifetime. The only thought he had was how to keep these tiny creatures alive. The mother might have sacrificed herself for them, but Jake wasn't about to let her effort be in vain. The moment his truck skidded to a stop in his driveway, Jake leaped out and rushed to the passenger side. He grabbed the puppies, now limp and barely moving, and dashed inside. The house was quiet. It always was in the mornings before Lily, his teenage daughter, left for school. "Lily," he called out, his voice sharp with panic. She appeared in the hallway, still in her pajamas, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Dad, what happened?" "I found them," he said quickly, his voice strained. "The puppies, they're freezing. I need your help." Lily's eyes flickered to the tiny creatures in her father's arms. Her face softened immediately. "Oh my God, what happened to their mom?" Jake shook his head, his throat tightening. "She's gone. But these 2, they need to warm up fast." He laid the puppies down gently on the kitchen counter, careful not to hurt them. Lily immediately rushed to grab towels and the old heating pad they kept in the closet. She set the pad on the counter, adjusted the heat to low, and placed the puppies on it, wrapping them in the warm towels as best as she could. Jake stood back, watching his daughter work with calm efficiency, feeling completely useless despite his urgency. "Do you think they'll make it?" Lily asked quietly, her voice full of concern. "I hope so," Jake said. "But we have to keep them warm. We have to do everything we can." The silence in the kitchen was thick, the weight of what they were facing hanging in the air. As Jake stared at the little puppies, their tiny bodies wrapped in warmth, something stirred inside him. He wasn't going to give up on them, not when they still had a chance. The hours seemed to stretch longer than they should have. Jake and Lily worked in tandem, taking turns holding the puppies close, watching them closely, and making sure their little bodies stayed warm. The heating pad was on the lowest setting, providing just enough heat to begin the slow process of bringing their body temperatures back up. It wasn't enough to rush them back to health, but it was a start. Hope, the smaller of the 2, still wasn't responding as much. Her tiny body barely moved under the towel, and Jake's heart sank every time he checked her. Spirit, on the other hand, seemed to be slightly stronger. His little tail flickered from time to time, a tiny sign of life. But neither of them was out of danger. Lily stood quietly at the counter, her face drawn with concern. She kept checking on the puppies, adjusting the towels, and adding more warmth when needed. It was clear how much she cared for them already. Jake could see the same tenderness in her as he'd seen in the way she had always taken care of the family pets growing up. "Dad, what if they don't make it?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but filled with doubt. She wasn't looking at him, but at the puppies lying on the counter. Jake didn't have an answer right away. His mind raced, trying to find a solution, a miracle, anything that would make them better. But there was no magic fix, no quick way to save them. It was all about patience, about being there for them through their weakest moments. "I don't know, sweetie," Jake replied finally, "but we're not giving up. Not yet." They worked for the next few hours in silence, save for the occasional soft whimper from Hope and Spirit. Jake's stomach growled, reminding him they hadn't eaten anything yet. But he couldn't bring himself to leave the puppies to get food. They needed him, and he needed them to make it through this. By early afternoon, Jake could see small changes. Hope's breaths were a little deeper, and her body twitched occasionally, a sign that her muscles were beginning to come back to life. Spirit seemed more alert now, his little eyes opening halfway, and his movements becoming stronger, even if just slightly. Jake's shoulders relaxed for the first time all day. Maybe there was hope after all. But the process was far from over. They weren't out of the woods yet. The puppies were fragile, their lives still hanging in the balance. But Jake knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't leave them. Not when they had come so far. Not when they still had a chance. As the day stretched on, Jake and Lily settled into a rhythm. They monitored the puppies constantly, checking their temperature, offering small doses of water, and gently rubbing their tiny bodies to keep the blood circulating. Every small movement from the puppies felt like a victory, but they were still far from out of danger. Jake had no idea how much time they had left, but he couldn't afford to waste any of it. By late afternoon, when the sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, Jake had a moment of clarity. His daughter was busy sitting beside the puppies, talking to them softly as she stroked their fur, trying to comfort them. Jake pulled out his phone, still unsure of how or why he thought of it, but he knew that there was no turning back once he did. He wrote a quick post on a local Facebook group. "Found 2 puppies abandoned with their mother by the side of the road this morning. Mom didn't make it, but I've got them in my care now. If anyone can help or has advice on what to do, please let me know." He didn't expect much, maybe some advice, maybe someone from the community offering help. He wasn't thinking of fame or attention. But within minutes, the post exploded. Comments began flooding in, people offering puppy supplies, old blankets, and even people who had experience rescuing animals. Others simply shared the post, hoping it would reach the right person. Jake didn't know what to think. What started as a desperate plea for help quickly turned into a small-town story that no one seemed able to ignore. A woman from a nearby animal rescue center responded almost immediately, offering to send over puppy formula, along with instructions on how to feed them. A few local families, moved by the story, offered to drop by with food or help in any way they could. It felt surreal. Jake kept reading through the messages, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. In a way, he hadn't expected to find so much support. But there it was, a community rallying behind the 2 little puppies who had captured everyone's hearts. Even more surprising were the messages from people who had heard the story and wanted to adopt one of the puppies if they made it. Jake hadn't considered adoption yet. His mind was focused entirely on keeping them alive. But the outpouring of support was overwhelming. It gave him hope. They weren't alone anymore. Lily looked over at him, her face brightening with the glow of the phone screen. "Dad, look at all these people," she exclaimed. "They want to help." Jake smiled, but it was a smile tinged with exhaustion and uncertainty. "They don't know if these pups are going to make it yet, sweetie." But even so, he couldn't help feeling a little lighter. The puppies had a chance now, not just because of him, but because of the people who had heard their story and were willing to stand behind them. The next few days were a blur of hope and anxiety. The puppies, Hope and Spirit, grew stronger, but every minute felt like a fragile dance between life and death. Jake and Lily continued their round-the-clock care routine, keeping the puppies warm, feeding them every few hours, and watching for any signs that they were improving. But Jake couldn't shake the image of the mother German Shepherd. Even as Hope and Spirit began to show small signs of recovery, he couldn't ignore the silent presence of the dog who had given everything to keep them safe. He had buried her in the yard behind the house, under the tall pine tree that had become a quiet, peaceful spot for reflection. One evening, as the wind howled through the trees, Jake stood in the fading light by the grave. His heart ached as he placed a small wooden sign at the base of the tree, the words carved by hand with simple, deliberate care. "A mother's love never freezes." He had made the sign as a tribute to the dog who had sacrificed everything for her pups. Lily stood beside him, silent, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She hadn't said much about the mother dog, but Jake could see the sadness in her eyes. "I keep thinking about her," Lily said quietly, breaking the silence. She must have been so scared, but she still protected them. She didn't give up. Jake nodded, his throat tight. She was a fighter, just like them. He paused for a moment, watching the faint light of dusk fade into the darkness. "I couldn't just leave her out there, not like that. Not when she gave everything for them." Lily reached over and gently touched her father's arm, a gesture of comfort. "She didn't die in vain, Dad. They're alive because of her." The two stood there for a moment longer, watching the shadows stretch across the yard. Then Jake took a deep breath and turned toward the house. The puppies were still inside, nestled in blankets and cradled by the warmth of the heater. They had a long way to go, but there was no doubt in Jake's mind that they would make it. When they went back inside, the atmosphere was different. The weight of the tragedy seemed to lift, if only slightly, with the promise of new beginnings. The puppies, though still fragile, were fighting. And in their fight, they carried the strength of their mother with them. Jake smiled at Lily as he passed her on his way to the kitchen. "We've got a lot of work to do, but we're not alone." "Not anymore." Lily nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "We'll get them through this." And in that moment, Jake realized something important. They weren't just saving the puppies. They were keeping the memory of a courageous mother alive. The weeks that followed were a blur of tiny triumphs and setbacks. Hope and Spirit, named by Lily, who had a soft spot for giving animals strong, meaningful names, gradually grew stronger. Each day brought new challenges, but also new milestones. They began to open their eyes, their tiny paws growing stronger with every step. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of normalcy in the house. Hope, the smaller puppy, was a bundle of uncertainty at first. She clung to warmth, her tiny body always seeking out the heat of the blankets or the gentle touch of Jake's hands. But she was starting to show signs of the strength her mother had passed on to her, slowly, steadily, with the determination of a fighter. Spirit, on the other hand, was already showing his playful side. He was the more curious of the two, exploring the house with wobbly steps. He had a fierce little bark, though it was more of a squeak than a full-grown woof, and it seemed to catch him off guard each time. Lily laughed every time it happened, and it became the sweetest sound in the house. As the weeks passed, the puppies began to take over more and more of the space in Jake and Lily's lives. The initial worry had turned into routine care, and the emotional weight of the journey was slowly replaced with joy. Hope and Spirit were no longer just two fragile, freezing puppies. They were part of their family now, growing and thriving each day. Jake had been surprised by how quickly they had become attached. It wasn't just the daily care. It was their personalities, the bond they shared with him and Lily. Spirit would follow Jake around the house, his tail wagging furiously, as if asking to be picked up. Hope, quieter and more reserved, would curl up beside Lily while she worked on her homework, her soft breathing a constant background noise. Word of the rescue had spread even further in the town. People stopped by to check on the puppies, some offering more supplies, while others simply wanted to see the little fighters for themselves. Jake had never expected to be at the center of so much attention, but it felt good. It felt right. The community had rallied behind them, and they had all become part of something bigger. Jake looked over at Lily one evening as she sat on the couch. Hope nestled in her lap, while Spirit curled up at her feet. "You know, we're not the only ones they're inspiring," he said, his voice filled with pride. Lily smiled, running her fingers through Hope's fur. "Yeah, I think everyone needs a reminder that things can get better, even when they seem hopeless." It was a moment of peace, one they had longed for during the long days of uncertainty. They had come through it together, and now the future seemed bright for these two little puppies who had found their second chance at life. The search for Charlie was frantic. Emma and Laura spent hours driving around the neighborhood, calling his name, checking local shelters, and posting updated flyers. Every corner they turned, every street they walked, seemed to lead them to more dead ends. Emma felt a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. The puppy that had once brightened her life had slipped away, and now she couldn't help but feel the same desperation Laura had expressed. They had retraced all the paths Charlie used to take when he was first with Emma, hoping he would return to some familiar place. It seemed impossible that he had just disappeared without a trace. Each time they checked a shelter or an alley, Emma's heart dropped a little more. She kept telling herself that Charlie wasn't gone forever, that he was somewhere waiting to be found. But the longer they searched, the more she feared the worst. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the city, Emma and Laura stood at the edge of the park where they had first met. The spot where Charlie had once been found felt eerily quiet now. Emma leaned against a tree, trying to steady her breath. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but when she checked it, there were no new messages. There were no sightings, no updates. Laura stood nearby, her face drawn with exhaustion, her eyes red from hours of searching. "I don't know what else to do," she said, her voice heavy with defeat. I thought we were finally going to be okay. But now he's gone again." Emma's chest tightened as she watched Laura struggle. She wasn't sure how much longer either of them could keep going. She felt the same sadness rising inside her, the same fear. Charlie had been a part of her life for so long, and she knew that letting go again would be harder than ever. Just as Emma was about to suggest they call it a night and regroup in the morning, she heard a faint, familiar sound in the distance, something that made her stop dead in her tracks. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her heart leaping in her chest. Laura looked up, her eyes widening. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly alert. There, from the shadows near the park's entrance, came a small, unmistakable bark. It was Charlie's bark, soft, unsure, but unmistakably his. Emma's heart soared, and without thinking, she ran toward the sound, calling his name. "Charlie, Charlie, is that you?" The bark came again, followed by the sound of small paws tapping on the pavement. Emma's pulse quickened, and she rounded the corner to see a familiar sight. Charlie was standing there, looking at her with wide, curious eyes, his tail wagging cautiously. He seemed to be unsure, hesitant, but he recognized her. His little body shook slightly as he took a tentative step forward. "Charlie," Emma exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. She knelt down, arms outstretched, and within seconds, The little dog bounded toward her, jumping into her arms as if nothing had changed. His small body was warm and familiar, and Emma hugged him tightly, not caring that she was crying. Laura came up behind Emma, tears in her eyes. "He's here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He found you." Charlie licked Emma's cheek as she held him close, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. The world seemed to stop spinning as she and Charlie shared a quiet reunion. Emma looked up at Laura, who was standing there, her expression a mixture of relief and wonder. "He found his way back to you," Laura said softly, her voice full of awe. "I thought I had lost him for good, but he came back." Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I think he was confused," she said. "He's been through so much. He needed time." Laura smiled through her tears, taking a step forward. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You've taken care of him. You've given him love. I can't take that away from you." Emma glanced down at Charlie, who was content in her arms. It was clear that he hadn't made a full decision, and for the first time, Emma realized that maybe it wasn't about whose home he belonged to. Maybe Charlie just needed to find his place, and he was still trying to figure it out. By the time spring arrived, Hope and Spirit had become the heart of Jake and Lily's home. The tiny, fragile puppies that had once seemed so close to death were now healthy, playful, and full of energy. Their coats had filled out, their little tails wagged constantly, and their bright eyes sparkled with life. The bond they shared with Jake and Lily had deepened beyond words. Hope had grown into a confident little dog. She still had moments of quiet reserve, often curling up beside Lily when the house became too loud, but she was now more independent, always eager to explore and learn new things. Spirit, on the other hand, was as lively as ever. He had a knack for getting into mischief, always finding ways to get attention, whether it was by jumping onto the couch or playfully stealing socks from the laundry basket. Jake found himself laughing more than he had in years. His mornings had gone from a routine of work and solitude to a whirlwind of puppy energy and love. Spirit and Hope kept him on his toes, but in the best possible way. Lily had taken on much of the responsibility for the puppies, but Jake was fully involved now, especially when it came to their outdoor playtime. The day after the puppies had their final checkup with the vet, Jake and Lily sat in the living room, watching the puppies play tug-of-war with an old rope toy. A sense of peace settled over them, and Jake couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. "I can't believe they're really okay," Lily said, her voice soft but filled with awe as she watched Spirit tug at the rope with determination. "It feels like just yesterday they were so tiny and helpless." Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the two puppies. "It's a miracle, really, but they're not just surviving, they're thriving. They've got so much life in them now, and I think they're teaching us a lot, too." Lily smiled, her gaze flicking over to the small wooden sign in the backyard, the tribute to their mother. "Yeah, I think they're teaching us that even when things seem impossible, there's always a way forward." Jake stood up and walked over to the window, watching the puppies tumble and play outside. His heart swelled with pride. The tragedy of that cold morning had turned into something beautiful, something they could all take pride in. "They're not just our family now," Jake said quietly. "They're part of the community, too." Lily nodded, her eyes glistening. "They're our miracle, Dad." Jake smiled and watched as Hope and Spirit ran through the yard, their joyful barks echoing in the spring air. Their journey had been hard, but it had led to a new beginning, one filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. "He's not just yours or mine," Emma said, her voice soft but firm. "He's our little Charlie. He's part of both of us now. And I think that's enough." As she said the words, Charlie snuggled closer to her chest, his tail wagging contentedly. He had found his way back to Emma, but something had shifted in that moment. There would always be a part of his past with Laura, a piece of his life that belonged to her. But now there was a new chapter, one where he was loved by both women who had cared for him, and that was something they could both embrace. And as the three of them stood there, under the fading light of the day, Emma knew that while Charlie's journey had been full of uncertainty, it had also brought them all closer together in a way no one could have predicted.